Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final seminar in the Advanced Plant Science Seminar Series. I want to welcome everyone from the department, but also to everyone who is attending from our broader community. It's really great to see good participation and attendance today, and I'm just going to take a minute to let you know about our seminar series so that you can continue to participate next year. The Advanced Plant Science Seminar Series is really a forum for our graduate students and scientists within our department to present their research findings and share ideas amongst one another, but all seminars are open to our community and our industry partners, and we've had really great participation this year, and I hope that we can keep that up and hope you'll stay tuned to our seminar series in the future. And we also have many external speakers as well so that we can keep on top of the latest developments in the industry. So, and I should introduce myself. I'm Kristen McMillan, and I was the chair for the Advanced Plant Science Seminar Series this year. So today's seminar speaker is actually a panel of speakers and a seminar as well as a conversation around organic agriculture. And so I'm going to introduce the leader and the lead presenter, and that's Dr. Martin Entz. Martin doesn't need much of an introduction to most of you, but I'm going to provide a brief biography for everyone. So Martin is a professor of cropping systems and natural systems agriculture in the University of Manitoba's Plant Science Department. He received his PhD from the University of Saskatchewan in 1988 and worked as a farm manager and research agronomist before embarking on his academic career. Some of Martin's achievements include establishing and leading the Glen Lee study, which is Canada's oldest organic conventional farming systems comparison study, which will be entering its 30th season. In 2011, Martin started Canada's first farmer participatory wheat and oat breeding program focused on organic production. Martin teaches courses in crop production and often hosts a summer institute at the U of M Carbon campus. He's led agricultural projects in Central America, Zimbabwe, East Africa, and North Korea. And most recently, Martin is a member of the Prairie Food Vision Network, who are winners of the 2020 Rockefeller Foundation Food Systems Vision Prize. And I left Martin's quote here for last. The goal of Martin's research program is to discover new ways of farming ecologically, to empower farmers with knowledge to design organic farming systems adapted to where they live, and to engage students in this exciting process. Because I think that's just what Martin's going to do today with some of his team members. So I'm going to pass it off to Martin, and Martin will introduce his other team members as the seminar proceeds.
Thank you very much, Kristen. I'm assuming you can hear me and you can see my slides. So thank you all for joining us from Treaty 1 territory here in Winnipeg, wherever you are. Today, I'm joined by grad student Will Bailey-Elkin, research associate Catherine Stanley, and colleague from the Department of Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development, Dr. Laura Telford. And they'll introduce themselves a bit more as we go into the seminar. So today we want to argue the case that organic agriculture deserves a seat at the grown-ups table. This talk, this conversation explores the fundamental role of organic agriculture and how it can contribute to people and the planet. I want to begin by focusing on, there we go, thanks. You should be able to see the next slide now. This particular conversation focuses on two major environmental threats: biodiversity loss and climate change. Let me say a word about them. Ehrlich and Ehrlich in 1981 defined biodiversity, or used the analogy that species are to ecosystems as rivets are to an airplane's wing. Losing one would be okay, but each loss increases the risk of disaster. Effects of biodiversity loss are being felt around the planet, including on the Canadian prairies, one of the youngest and most ecologically intact breadbaskets in the world. Canadian researchers have documented a 39% decline in bird populations on the prairies over the last 30 years. The second threat that we want to focus on is climate change, or as Wes Jackson likes to refer to it, as rapid climate change. This is already reducing wheat yields in Australia, and it's intensifying human migration from affected areas. Climate change could cost Canada between $21 and $43 billion per year by 2050, according to the National Roundtable on the Economy and the Environment. Now, the second point is that businesses are getting more serious about the environment. They're being pushed by their consumers and by their investors. Financial institutions have actually pledged to address biodiversity loss, which I think is really refreshing. And financial institutions are also embracing the International Convention on Biological Diversity. I think other businesses are going to follow. Climate change, or climate action, is being driven anew by the Paris Accord now that the Americans have rejoined. So in the face of these hopeful initiatives, what does organic agriculture have to offer? Well, I think we need to talk about the elephant in the room. Organic farming cannot feed the world is a statement I hear often. So let's take a moment to unpack it. First of all, when we say world, do we actually know the world? This perspective kind of sets it, of course, on its head from our perspective, but it also creates an image where we can see what size continents and countries really are. My colleague Fouad Daif has commented that Sudan can feed all of Africa. And when you look at Sudan, which of course now is split into two countries, it's an enormous landmass. And so he has an important point. So I think it's really good to recognize what our world really looks like. And there might be lots of production capacity in many different places that we don't think about. But as the world's fifth largest exporter of raw and processed agricultural products, Canadian agribusiness and governments are reluctant to take their foot off the production gas pedal. In fact, a government-sanctioned report recently called the Barton Report identified agriculture as one of Canada's best hopes for future economic growth. And so it's easy to see why people are threatened and asking, why should we consider organic agriculture with its sometimes lower yields? Well, one reason is that organic agriculture is driving the very innovation that Barton calls for. Except it is doing this by harnessing nature's processes, as is illustrated here on some work that we were happy to be involved in, lucky to be involved in Nicaragua. The second reason speaks to farmers' worst enemy, overproduction, which leads to low prices. What if the world markets for our products are smaller than we predict? The United Nations Development Program projected a global population of 10.88 billion in 2100. However, taking a new look at fertility rates, Volset et al. Suggests that global population will peak at 9.73 billion in 2064, then drop to 8.8 billion by 2100. Further, if the Sustainable Development Goals for education, in particular education for girls, is considered, Volset et al. In 2020 predict a global population in 2100 of 6.88 billion. That's fewer people than today. Now, we can't predict the future, but these are important scholarly reports. But one thing that many, many people recognize is that education of girls is our best hope to stave off runaway global population growth. And if you look at the map from World Mapper, clearly there's a lot of work to do. There's three additional points I think we need to consider when we talk about global food security. First, most food around the world is produced locally, and small-scale farmers play an important role in that job. 1 in 12 people on the planet is an Indian farmer. Now, more local production is important, especially in areas of the world where populations are projected to increase dramatically, like sub-Saharan Africa, 3.07 billion people by 2100. But here is my second point. More local production does not necessarily translate into all being fed well. For example, fertilizer subsidy programs designed to increase production in developing countries have sometimes led to lower nutritional outcomes because of reduced crop diversity, less time for women to breastfeed, a focus on export crops, and in some cases, failure to actually increase yields. So the work of many scholars and NGOs, including those of Rachel Besner-Kerr, with several decades of experience in Southern Africa, have concluded that community-based participatory approaches based on ecological farming methods that tackle gender and other social inequalities are much more effective for nutritional security. Third, a lot of food goes into our gas tanks. Roughly 35% of the entire US corn crop is used to produce fuel. And that provides enough fuel for 10% of all automobile gas requirements in that country. So if we turn that around, and if we could find a 10% reduction in gas consumption, that would free up 20 million acres of land, which is about twice the land base of Southern Ontario. In Canada, use of canola as an automobile fuel is also increasing. The biofuel lesson is this: conservation and energy efficiency will save more fuel than can be replaced by putting crops into gas tanks. But Canada will remain a major food exporter. We have a large land base and a small population, plus viable international markets for our high quality products exist. But the design of food strategy based mostly on exports not only poses risks to nature at home, it could put Canada into a precarious economic position. So that is sort of some interesting comments talking about, well, some introductory comments about that sort of what I call the elephant in the room, and I wanted to address the question. Now we want to talk about organic agriculture. And one of the assumptions that I sometimes make is that people actually understand everything about organic agriculture, and that's not always the case. So we're very lucky to have Will Bailey-Elkin, who's going to tell us a little bit about how organic agriculture is formed and regulated in Canada. Will, over to you.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, it's great to be here. So my name is Will. In 2017, I'll just start with a little bit about myself. In 2017, I finished an undergraduate degree in sustainable agriculture at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. And the degree really focused on certified organic vegetable and livestock production. After Kwantlen, I moved back home to Winnipeg. In the spring of 2019, I trained as an organic inspector with the International Organic Inspectors Association, and then began working as an organic inspector for about a year. So I'm still a bit of a rookie, but I think I have a good understanding of the organic sector. And then in the fall of 2019, I started a master's with Martin, which I've been working on since then. So I'm hoping I can help sort of share a little bit of information about the regulatory framework of the organic industry. So if you could just move to the next slide, Martin, please. So this slide represents the different groups that really come together to form this regulatory framework of certified organic crop production in Canada. And we can see that at the top, we have the Canadian Organic Standard. And this sort of generally refers to two major documents. You have the General Principles and Management Standards, and then the Permitted Substances List. These two documents, they really come together to outline how an organic producer should operate in order to maintain organic certification. And we can see that there are these two groups that mainly enforce the Canadian organic standard, and then groups that support or maintain the organic standard. On the right side of the diagram, we have the Standards Interpretation Committee, the Canadian General Standards Board, Committee on Organic Agriculture, the Organic Federation of Canada, and then the Organic Federation of Canada working groups. I won't spend too much time talking about specific groups, but really a good thing to know is that their main function is to work together to interpret the standard, provide guidance to the groups that enforce the standard, and then they facilitate a review of the organic standard that takes place every 5 years. Now, on the left of this diagram, we have this whole set of organizations that enforce the organic standard. And it really all starts with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and they're responsible for verifying and enforcing the regulations. One of their major roles is designating conformity verification bodies and certifying bodies. Conformity verification bodies, they really assess applications from certifying bodies and make recommendations to the CFIA about which ones should be accredited to work as certifying bodies. And then these certifying bodies, they employ inspectors and certification officers to ensure that organic producers do adhere to the Canadian organic standard. And we could move on to the next slide, please. So then we have the actual inspection. I should note too that, you know, certifying bodies, they employ inspectors and they sort of cover a broad range of groups. Some are non-for-profit, some are for-profit organizations. But anyways, so we have the annual inspection. Every certified organic producer must have one organic inspection per year. And really, if the inspection goes well, they should receive their organic certificate for which is valid for another year. The organic standard, those two documents, that it outlines what a client can and cannot do. Every producer, they have what's called an organic systems plan, and this outlines how a producer plans to meet the organic standard. So my job as an inspector is to verify on site whether or not the organic systems plan is in fact being applied. And we have sort of two major areas of the inspection. We have the field and equipment inspection, and then the internal audit. I'll use a grain farm on the prairies as an example. In this case, we would inspect all the fields, the equipment, and then the bin storage. Some examples of what you would do for the crop inspection or a field inspection would be, you know, looking at buffer zones, making sure they're large enough or high enough. Looking for evidence of herbicide application, if that maybe was occurring, taking some residue samples. Then for equipment, the main thing is really ensuring that there's no risk of something contaminating the integrity of the organic product. So, for example, if an organic farmer shares his seeding equipment with a non-organic farmer, I would take note of that and make sure to look at ensure that there's a record or document showing that the seeding equipment was cleaned between uses. And then once that field and equipment inspection is completed, we move to an internal audit. This starts with a document review, which ensures that adequate record keeping is taking place, and it allows an inspector to evaluate whether or not there are voids in the organic systems plan that could lead to contamination of the organic product. So just making sure that there is a risk management plan. Then there's a mass balance exercise. This helps indicate whether or not an operation's sales are consistent with the operation's production capacity. So making sure that how much producer produces aligns with how much they're selling. And then finally, we also have a traceability exercise. So this just allows us to monitor from the beginning to the end of the organic product to make sure that you can, there's a method of identifying the organic product from the beginning of the production to the sale of it. So you can trace it throughout the whole supply chain. And then the final part of the audit is a yield estimate. So each year we estimate with the producer what the annual yields might be in an effort to understand their production capacity, the production capacity of the farmer, but also maybe the production capacity of that region as well. So that's all I have for today. I hope that it provided everyone with maybe a bit more of an understanding of what's sort of behind that label, and I'll pass it back to Martin. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. That was great. Really appreciate that. Okay, so let's then take a look at what we've been doing at the University of Manitoba, where we've been working on organic agriculture since 1992. The U of M is home to the Glenlee study, which Kristen mentioned is entering its 30th year. And it was established to really compare organic with conventional and challenge us to use things like circular nutrients in the organic production system. We also manage the Organic Crops Field Laboratory, which is located at the ENN Morrison Research Farm in Carman for agronomic studies. So we could spend an entire semester talking about what we've learned in these in the 29 years, coming up to 30 years at Glenlee. But let me just share a couple of highlights. What you're looking at here on the screen, hopefully it shows up, is an alfalfa crop. And the front of the plot looks really good. And this is an organic rotation. Why is it looking so good? Well, it's because it's well fertilized and we're using nutrients from what we call the circular nutrient cycle. So animal manures have always been part of enriching the soil and organic systems, but we know that there's just not enough manure coming from animals. There's also manure coming from people. And so that is now being brought into the system either through digestate, which is anaerobically digested food waste, or food waste that is processed by black soldier fly larvae. These are both organically certified products. So, but if you look at the back of the plot, you can see, oh, they must have forgot to seed the back of the plot, but that's not the case. The back half of the plot has never received any nutrient amendments, and so it has a phosphorus crisis, and it's no longer possible to grow really good alfalfa crops in that system. And so this is very valuable in the long-term study to show people what works and what doesn't work. Now, the way the randomization works is this is the wheat crop that follows this alfalfa. And you can see for a wheat crop that's in a 2-decade-old organic system, it looks really quite good. So when we have visitors to Glenlee, we like to show them what's working, what's not working, and it's been a wonderful teaching tool and learning tool. And we've had about 24 graduate students now do their doctorate or master's work on this study. Now I want to focus on some other things that we learned in terms of climate change. There's 4 studies that have focused on carbon of some kind at Glenlee, but I just want to highlight microbial biomass carbon measurements in our high functioning systems. Microbial biomass carbon is really the gold standard for soil carbon. And what we've noticed is that the organic systems in our high functioning system, we also have low functioning organic systems. They are statistically significantly higher than the conventional production, and everything else is equal: varieties, tillage, everything else. And that's not only true where we're adding circular nutrients, but where we haven't added circular nutrients. So this is a good news story that organic agriculture has the potential to actually add more living carbon, and also it reduces the amount of energy in the production system, but I'm not going to spend time on that today. The other greenhouse gas we're concerned about is nitrous oxide. And in fact, in agriculture, this is one of the big ones. This is something that is a real wicked problem for our production in Canada. And so working alongside my colleague, Mario Tenuta, he and I have done a lot of the work at Glenlee together, and his grad student, Megan Westfall, we asked this question: how do the organic systems compare with the conventional in terms of nitrous oxide? And what we found is that under average moisture conditions, there was a vast difference. The organic system, even when we had worked the alfalfa into the soil, which is a lot of nitrogen, which really should give you that plume of nitrous oxide, we didn't see it. But under these extremely wet conditions, there was no difference. So we're learning, we're starting to put together the data set. But what we're seeing is that under sort of average conditions, there seems to be a benefit to organic agriculture in terms of nitrous oxide emissions. And that's really exciting. The other place where we're trying to reduce our energy footprint is in the amount of tillage used in organic agriculture. We get a lot of criticism. Oh, you till so much, you're not no-till, so we're going to write you off. That's why you're not at the grown-ups table. And there's been a fantastic group of grad students and technicians who've worked on this question. And so we've made lots of progress here as well, using brand new implements like this blade roller, which is a whole different concept, or this wide row cultivator, which is something that was used on the dryland prairies in the 1930s. So between Glenlee and the Organic Crops Field Laboratory, we started having a lot of information. And we felt that we needed to address the agronomists that were advising farmers. And so I want to invite Catherine Stanley to tell you a story about this.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, everybody, for attending today. So again, I'll just quickly introduce myself before I jump into talking about our training program. But as Martin mentioned, my name is Catherine Stanley. I work as a research associate at the University of Manitoba in the Natural Systems Agriculture Lab. I'm actually a graduate of the University of Manitoba as well. I completed a Bachelor of Science in Agroecology with a minor in Soil Science in 2013. Following that, I did a master's degree in organic weed control and agronomy at the University of Saskatchewan with Dr. Steve Shirtliff. And then when I came back to Winnipeg, I started working in the Natural Systems Agriculture Lab, where I've been just over 5 years. And during that time, I also worked as an organic agronomy specialist with the Manitoba Organic Alliance. So during the time that I've worked at the university and even during my master's, I've been really privileged to work with many experienced farmers and researchers. And as Martin mentioned, learn a lot from the things that they've done for the last 30 years in the lab, and learn a lot from other grad students that have been in the lab. And I've been really lucky to be able to share that information with prairie agronomists and prairie organic producers. Martin, if you don't mind. So kind of tying on to what Martin said, that, through the research that we've been doing, through our conversations with farmers, a lot of knowledge had been accumulated. And in the last, 10 years or more, as we saw interest and acres grow in organic agriculture across the prairies, it became very quickly evident that there were extensive knowledge gaps in organic production in both industry and institutions, with agronomists, in government, and also among farmers that were interested in transitioning to organic agriculture. And we had, previously been engaging with farmers, and we had field days and we have conferences and whatnot, but it really became clear that there needed to be an extension of that knowledge outside of our lab into the communities in which we are starting to see a lot more organic producers looking for that information and looking for that knowledge. And so in 2015, we started the Organic Agronomy Training Program in partnership with the Prairie Organic Grains Initiative. And this program ran over the course of about 3 years and we conducted it in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and in Manitoba. And so how we approached this program was first to kind of identify what were the knowledge gaps in organic production agronomy for agronomists that are traditionally working, maybe not having as much experience in organic across the prairies. And we invited agronomists, we invited farmers, we invited government to attend a first in-person training session, kind of at these 3 locations across the prairies. So in Alberta, we hosted a meeting in Macomb. In Saskatchewan, our first meeting was in Moose Jaw, and in Manitoba, we hosted at our field research station in Carman, Manitoba. And so, as I mentioned, we structured this program with an initial first in-person meeting, which was really great and beneficial, and it's something that I miss so much in these COVID days. But during that meeting, we were really able to kind of get to know the communities in those different regions and really have an opportunity face-to-face to go over some of the basic agronomic production information of organic agriculture. So the audiences, I would say, varied from folks that had very limited knowledge in organic agriculture, but also some experienced organic farmers that were looking to get some more information, to consult and to provide advice to new organic farmers in their area. So following the in-person session, we continued to engage with the attendees over the course of the year. And the way that we continued this engagement, in retrospect, seems silly now that we do all this all the time with COVID, but we did it with social media. So back when kind of like Facebook was the main type of social media. And then also we had online or over the phone conference call style seminars, which we called coffee shop talks. And we held these once a month over the course of the year, where how it was structured is we would invite a speaker, so either scientist or farmer or a certifier, to give a short seminar, usually over the lunch hour or at a convenient time of the day, over the phone, so a conference call style, and we would email out the presentations. And now that was before Zoom, but that was just a really great way where people could engage in that knowledge generation without physically having to go anywhere, and it really allowed us to keep the audience engaged for a longer period of time. So after the period of the first year, we did another in-person meeting to really do more like targeted problem solving, targeted in on some more in-depth agronomic issues and training with organic agriculture. And then we continued after that with another 1.5 years of the conference calls, where we've put most of them on our YouTube page. And that's been a really successful method. So in general, I just wanted to keep this really brief. We trained over 150 participants across the Prairie provinces, and had a number of in-person meetings and really great feedback from the group. And I would say that I think in the last few years especially, this has shown to be really important, because we're seeing specific commodity processors such as the pea and hemp industry, as well as wheat and oats, really begin to contract a lot of organic acres, and as a result, hiring their own organic agronomists to help secure the commodity and secure the organic acres. And a lot of those agronomists went through our program, which is pretty exciting. So again, just wanted to share a little bit about what we've done to help translate knowledge into a broader audience, and I'll let Martin finish up his seminar. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. That was great. We had so much fun doing that program. Okay, so let's get back to the academic part of the lesson here. I've got my notes. I want to talk a little bit about biodiversity now. We talked about climate change, now biodiversity. And we're back to Glenlee. And I want to share some of the results of biodiversity within the soil microbiome. So Kathy Welch was an MSc student with Mario Tenuta, and here she is taking a sample out of the flax plots. And what Kathy did is painstakingly separated the fungal spores from organic and conventional plots. Now, these are the fungi that form the mycorrhiza that link the plant to the soil. And so they're good guys, they're good fungi. And what we've seen, it was very striking, is that a greater abundance and a greater diversity of the spores in the organic compared to the conventional systems. So we have other evidence from Glenlee, which just layers upon layers of greater diversity in the organic system. But let me read from the literature. Using data from Europe, New Zealand, USA, and Canada, Hole et al. In 2005 stated that the majority of the 76 studies reviewed in this paper clearly demonstrate that species abundance and/or richness across a wide range of taxa tend to be higher on organic farms than on locally representative conventional farms. a major driver of that improvement is plant diversity. Now, I want to emphasize plant diversity, not only because I'm in a plant science department, but because plant diversity is something farmers can control. Today, organic farmers in Europe grow an average of 7 crops in their rotations compared to 3 crops for conventional farmers. Organic farmers also grow more service or cover crops, plants designed to enrich soil, reduce nutrient losses, capture atmospheric carbon, and provide habitat. Now, what you've been looking at here is a map of Howe Park Farms near Brandon, Manitoba. Ian and Linda Grossart and their family have been farming this land for a long time, and they raise organic grains and organic grass-fed beef. And we can see that their rotation is even better than that average of 7. It's an 8-year rotation. And this is an absolutely fabulous rotation. 3 years of alfalfa, flax, oat, green manure, which is graze, wheat, rye, and you can see the field distribution. This type of rotation is not seen on conventional farms. So congratulations to Howe Park Farms. And also thanks to Myra Van Dee, who did her master's degree doing farm case studies of organic grass-fed farms in Manitoba and Ontario. Now, we know that the biodiversity in this farm is higher. And so why is that? Well, when we look at the footprint of the farm, we can see it is not like the monoculture fields that neighbor it. It's very diverse. There's ravines, there's forest. And so, you know, maybe it's not so surprising that there's more biodiversity on a farm like this. But one of the questions that researchers have been asking themselves is organic better for biodiversity because organic farms tend to be close to bush pastures and there's more native grassland in the area? Or is there something intrinsic about the fields that makes the biodiversity better or different on organic farms? Well, that question has been asked by a team of Swedish agroecologists led by Henrik Smith. One study showed that in order to restore farmland biodiversity, organic farming was most efficient in monoculture landscapes where there were only a few crop types and few natural areas. So you're welcome to, you know, download the paper and read it, but what really they found is that there was something about the fields themselves and not where they were located, not the fact that they were located in a matrix of landscape heterogeneity. There was something about the fields themselves that lent more biodiversity to the organic farms. So here's 3 organic farming pictures, one from Saskatchewan, one from Southeast Manitoba, and one from Manitoba's Interlake. So what is it that allows more biodiversity? Especially of birds, for example, which is what Henrik Smith and his team looked at. Is it the lamb's quarters growing here in this organic oat crop that are actually providing a food source for birds? Is it related to the mycorrhiza? Is it related to the greater carabid beetle numbers, which other graduate students have measured at Glenlee? So it's really quite exciting to think about how we can maintain biodiversity and also grow food. Wes Jackson calls it conservation as a consequence of production. I love that term. Now, if we take Henrik Smith's ideas and apply them to Manitoba, I've got this notion that this is where the organic farmers belong, the organic farms belong, in areas like the Red River Valley, where there is almost no landscape heterogeneity, and it's pretty well 3 crops, maybe 4 crops being grown in the area. So if we were to deploy our limited 2% of Canadian land is organic to maximum biodiversity benefit, this is where some organic farms should go. Okay, so let me just wrap up by saying that we're not proposing organic agriculture as a solution to navigate, you know, the only solution to navigate through these very serious problems. Reginault and Wachter, and that's John Reginault of Washington State University, award-winning organic soils researcher, They argue that a blend of organic and other innovative farming systems, including agroforestry, integrated farming, conservation agriculture, mixed crop and livestock, and still undiscovered systems will be needed for future global food and ecosystem security. But here's the rub. The agricultural establishment in Canada has worked for a long time on best management practices to deal with things like climate change and biodiversity. It has been frustrating to watch organic farming be excluded from most of those discussions. This must stop. It is time that certified organic farming be recognized as a legitimate and highly effective BMP for restoring farmland biodiversity and reducing the greenhouse gas footprint of agriculture in Canada. Integrated into Canada's existing agricultural landscape, organic agriculture is a market-based solution, very important, to some of our most wicked problems and a promising alternative to build a sustainable future for humans and the planet. So there, we've laid down our case in front of you. And now I'd like to invite Laura Telford to tell us a little bit about what is the state of organic farming.
Thank you, Martin. So you can go to my first slide. So Martin asked me to prepare a little bit of a report card about how organic is doing. If you want to flip to the next one, Martin. And I think that for me, the best way to do this is visually and with a few statistics, so bear with me. So I've been working in the organic sector. This is my 18th year now, and I have had a front row seat for a lot of the kind of heavy development part of the Canadian organic sector. So what you're going to see in front of you is some data slides. So you can see that in all three slides, which are from the International Federation of Organic Agriculture movements, which describes the state of organic farming in the world, that we've seen steep growth in almost all the indicators that you would care to measure in terms of number of producers, number of hectares of land, and the share that organic holds of the total land base. So that last slide is really interesting to me, that we started out at only 0.3% of agriculture in the late 90s, and we're now at 1.5%. We're even higher than that in Canada. And some countries are doing even better than that. So for example, Liechtenstein, which maybe doesn't count because of its size, is almost nearly half organic, is 41%. So many of the countries that are heavily organic are in Europe, but not all of them. And the way that Europe got here is because of its environmental policies. As Martin said, organic needs a seat at the grown-ups table, and Europe manages to get high land shares, like over 10% in about 16 different countries. And they do that by including organic agriculture at the apex of environmental policy. So farmers are paid for ecological goods and services, and organic farmers make out like bandits in that kind of a system. You want to switch to the next slide, Martin? So these are some of the other metrics that we look at when we're looking at progression in an organic sector. So number of handlers, and that includes all the other people who are super critical to the functioning of the organic system, the people who buy the grains, the people that process the fruits and vegetables, and the people that import and export all of that raw and value-added food. I find the consumption slide from iPhone really interesting. in only 9 years, the world has doubled the number of dollars that it spends per week on organic food, from $8.6 to $16.6. That's US dollars. You can see from the left slide that the market is growing incredibly, and that's in only 20 years. What I have seen in almost every country in the world is that the market metrics, i.e. sales, have always outpaced the production metrics. So in Canada and most parts of the world, we will see 3 to 4% increases in organic production, number of producers, number of acres, but we'll see 8 to 10% annual growth in organic sales, with the possible exception of the recession that happened starting in 2008. So next slide, Martin.
Do you want to talk about regulations, just that last?
Yeah,
Okay.
most of the stuff that's happened with the regulatory scene around the world has happened in the last decade, and we actually didn't measure it very well, or IFOAM didn't measure it very well before 2009. That's why that slide doesn't go back to 1999. So there has been rapid evolution of what we call bilateral equivalency arrangements between countries. This was really driven by the US and by the European Union countries that basically said, unless you get on our list of approved trading partners, you won't get to export your food to our market anymore. So that really, between those two largest markets in the world, they really drove the regulatory scene. And Canada was at the leading edge of that. For a while, we were beating America in terms of the number of arrangements that we had. Okay, next one.
You got it.
So now we're on to Canada. So you can see on the left are our production metrics, also steep growth, 1.4 million hectares. These data come now from the Canadian Organic Trade Association, or the Canada Organic Trade Association, but they used to be collected by Canadian organic growers. So you can see producers were at 5,700 and something. And again, handlers are everybody who is not a producer. And you can see there that we have a world-beating share of the land base at 2.3%. And our market is nothing to sneeze at either. Canada, a lot of people don't know this, but Canada has the 6th largest organic marketplace in the world. And we also do incredibly well on organic food processing, and our organic processors export around the world. And we also have quite a few products that are localized, specifically in grains and dairy. Canada is highly sufficient in those organic products. So they're grown here and consumed here. Okay, next slide. So I just wanted to kind of round out my comments earlier about policy. It is really hard to become a leading country in organic without investment. And Europe and the US have shown us that. I mentioned the European system of investment. You know, they have a common policy. Every single European country has its own organic strategic plan. and they all have their own investment program that is largely built around ecological agriculture. The US took a slightly different tactic in, for quite a number of years now. Organic has figured heavily in the US Farm Bill. And it is now at the point where organics gets a steadily growing share of revenue every single year. In 2021, organic in the US will be funded at about 95 million a year. By next year, research programs alone under the Farm Bill, organic research will receive 50 million a year. So if you compare that to the slide in front of you, you'll see what Canada's investment has been in organic science. So it is great that it's growing slightly, but it doesn't begin to compare with what we are doing, what other jurisdictions are doing in terms of funding organic. In terms of other kinds of program incentives in Canada, I would say that Quebec is a leader. They have a transition cost share system similar to the US's, and it's actually producing significant results. We're seeing as soon as Quebec started to get some funding for transition, the number of farmers in that province started to escalate. So they're definitely the leading organic province in the country right now. Several other provinces, including Manitoba, have experimented with cost share programs, but those have been largely one-offs and not sustained. And I think what we're seeing from Europe and the US is that for policy and programmatic inputs to make a difference, they have to be sustained. So thank you all for listening, and I'll hand it back to Martin.
Okay, thanks, Laura. That was great and so informative. So that brings us to the end of our seminar. Kristen, I'll send it back to you as the moderator. So we look forward to any comments or questions.
Okay. Thank you, Martin, Will, Catherine, and Laura for that very interesting and inspiring seminar. Now, I'm sure that's prompted a lot of questions and comments from our audience. So I would like to ask our viewers and listeners to please submit their comments. You can either raise your hand and speak directly with one or all of our presenters, or you can enter your question or comment in the chat box. So while our audience is thinking, maybe I'll go ahead with the first question. So my question is in regards to trying to come to terms with this gap between organic and, for lack of a better word, our conventional farming systems. So I think you've demonstrated well the benefits of organic practices. And my question is, in order to achieve or to address some of these challenges like biodiversity loss and climate change, does it need to be a whole shift in the system? Or can it be a combination of a shift in the system or an increase in organic systems? Or are there certain principles and practices that we can adopt into our conventional systems that will make the largest improvements? And the reason I'm asking that is we've seen some shifts in different approaches to farming with, and I can bring in some of the work of our colleagues, whether it's cover crops or omitting a herbicide in some phases of crop rotation. Are there some of those practices that can get us to where we want to go without the huge shift right away?
I'll take a quick stab at that. A lot of people certainly ask that question, and I teach courses in organic crop production to both degree and diploma students, and they're very interested in that. They take those ideas home and implement them. And But I'd say that what makes organic different, there's two reasons. One is, first of all, it's market-based, and a lot of the regenerative practices, there's no market, there's no premium for them, and so they're very difficult to implement in the long term. And secondly, the organic is where the innovation happens. So the picture that you're looking at on the bottom right, that's a Quebec farm. And the innovation that happens on the farm when you do not have pesticides and you do not have soluble fertilizers is incredible. And that innovation will never happen if you have the ability to go back to those systems. Maybe a third point very quickly is we worked on the pesticide-free production program for a long time, very hard for 20 years ago. And so we tried all that, but I'm pretty convinced that I would rather see farmers split their farm and have a portion in organic and one in whatever else they want to do than to have skip the odd herbicide. It's not enough. It's not enough, in my opinion. And the data, I think, supports my position.
Okay, thank you. So while we had that question, there's quite a few comments that came in. Okay, so from Greg Bartley, appreciates your presentation, and his question relates to the Howe Park example. I assume this farm has animal integration. How much of the benefit can be applied to the organic systems compared to the benefits associated with animal integration into the system?
Well, I'll because I brought it up, I'll take a quick stab at it, and then maybe Laura and Catherine would like to jump in as well. I think the animal integration, the picture that you're looking at here on the screen of those beef cattle, one of the real benefits of integration is that at Howe Park Farm, they were growing green manures, legumes to enrich the soil with nitrogen. But if you just, plow it down or work it down or crimp roll it down or whatever you do, it's a very expensive proposition. You do not have any income that year. But if you can graze that green manure, you can actually turn that loss into a profit. And there's a number, that's been probably one of the interesting growing trends on organic farm, is using those livestock to process those nitrogen enriching crops and make that phase of the rotation profitable. And maybe Catherine and Laura would like to make a comment about that as well.
Go ahead, Laura.
I don't know if I have anything to add other than I think Martin kind of summed it up when you were talking about the benefits of circularity. Like we've seen a paper come out of the Soil Association in the UK that talks about the world running out of phosphorus. And they strongly believe that, integrating human manure into the system, as Martin is starting to do with some of his research, is kind of the only way that this system is going to be sustainable in the long run.
Okay, I have several other questions and comments to get to. From Helen Booker, are there any organic specific breeding programs in Canada?
Yes, very good question. There is one that is very active, and that is the Agriculture Canada oat breeding program based out of Brandon. It was started by Jennifer Mitchell-Fetch, and now Kirby Nielsen has taken on that program now that Jennifer has retired. So that is a very sophisticated program that has registered 2 varieties already. There are also smaller programs. There's an organic wheat breeding program at the University of Alberta by Dean Spanner. Well, it's not such a small program. He's been active for a long time, made a big contribution. And there was an organic wheat breeding program at Ag Canada. It's kind of dormant for now. And then the University of Guelph Istvan Rashkan has just started an organic soybean breeding program. So those are just a few. There's other ones, and we run our farmer participatory program as well. So it's really exciting. And Helen, looking forward to having you breed crops for organic production.
Okay, great. We actually have Istvan on the line, and I've just unmuted him. I think he has his hand raised for a question.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to listen to this extremely interesting seminar. Thank you so much for extending that to Martin. Good to see you. I don't think you can see me, but you can hear me. So I just to add, yes, indeed, in response to Helen's questions, we do run what I would still call a small organic soybean breeding program at the University of Guelph, and we are part of the Organics Science Cluster 3 together with Martin, and we're collaborators on that. So it's going well, and it's been creating very interesting data. One question I have for anyone, for Martin or anyone else who among the speakers is, first of all, I'm sold. I'm a big supporter of organic, so it's not my own criticism, but I want to play. If I wanted to play the devil's advocate, the most common criticism we get from people who are opposed to organic is, how about the yields? We have seen a number of benefits to the environment, to the diversity. Everything has been covered very well. But you speak to the farmers and they tell you, well, if I'm going to grow a conventional soybean crop versus organic and spray the former with Roundup and the other one with nothing, I'm going to get lower yields. So that's a common criticism. And then secondly, weed control. That, many people, you can actually tell if you drive around Ontario, you can tell which ones are organic farms because they will tend to be more infested with weeds. So those are the most common points of criticism towards organic agriculture. I wonder what Martin has to say about that.
Yeah, well, I welcome that question. At Glenlee, we have yield records, and on average, organic yield, and Laura may have some other idea, about 70% of conventional. But once organic farmers get better, like the ones on the bottom right in the picture in Quebec, there's very little difference between their yields and conventional yields because they've worked hard on the system. And really, you've identified it as Istvan is you need the nutrient supply, and then you need weed control. And I'll let Catherine say a bit about weed control. Final point, we have in Manitoba, the largest organic potato producer in Canada is in Manitoba. And we regularly, we work with them and have them come talk to our students, and their potato yields and their organic onion yields are not very different than the conventional yields. So Catherine, do you want to say something about weed control? Because that's your area of expertise.
Sure, I'll keep it brief. I could give an hour-long seminar about weed control, but I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing with organic weed management on the prairies is there's a lot of introduction of new technologies coming from Europe. In European countries, they have a lot of automation and a lot of different companies and brands that work on weed control strategies, and we're seeing a lot of those European companies start to work in Canada, and a lot of farmers starting to adopt those new tools and technologies. For example, the camera-guided in-row cultivation systems. And so on the farms that are adopting those practices, we have seen substantial improvements in the ability to control weeds and subsequently improved yields. So that's just one example. But it is something that people are conscious about and continuously improving on.
I just wonder what those tools are, because if you spoke to my PhD student, he runs similar trials on organic farms and conventional with the same soybean populations, and if there's anything he would wish for is that he had to hoe the fields less than he has been. And so what are those new tools that would make the organic farmer's life easier in terms of weed management?
Well, it's a complicated answer, and I'd be happy to follow up with you. And
okay, we could discuss it later. Yeah,
thank you. Having these new tools and technology like the camera-guided inter-row cultivation, but also really good agronomy, and that's a point that often gets overlooked and can especially be forgotten if you're working in a conventional system where you're used to using herbicides. You don't really think so much about the plants that you're putting into the ground. And that's a really, really important part in organic, is that especially in a soybean plant or something like that, you do have to increase your plant population. You have to have good cultural weed control and really good agronomy.
So my advice to anybody looking at organic soybean production is to go to Quebec and go to the US Midwest They're using ridge tillage. They're using a lot of rye cover crops, and not just the crimp roll system, which doesn't work in our region. But this is a problem that requires significant investment, but I've seen it be very successful.
Thank you
now,
very much.
Final point on yield. Your former colleague, Ralph Martin, told me something. He said, Martin, Entz, if you're working on organic, you cannot waste food anymore, because until we get organic yields just a little bit higher, you can't waste that 30 to 35% of food that we waste in Canada. So I've taken that to heart, and we can make that gap with our food waste problem, but that's a little bit of a cop-out. I understand that.
I believe Ralph is here with us. Both of us were looking forward to, as well as my student Shin. So thank you very much.
Yes, Ralph is here, and I think he had a question on livestock integration that has already been addressed, but if I'm wrong, please raise your hand there, Ralph. I also have a question from Scott Beaton. He has his hand raised, and if you unmute yourself, you can speak up while I read out the next question, but I see that you're muted right now. From Andrew Hammermeister, we have a question, a comment first. Thank you for the great presentation. What tables do you think the organic sector should be at where we are not?
Well, I think certainly at the commodity groups who have a lot of sway on the research that gets done, and I'm going to be very honest here, the commodity groups like Western Grains has funded us, but like the Manitoba Crop Alliance and the Pulse Growers, and these are very Grain Farmers of Ontario. These are extremely influential groups because they leverage a lot of government money. They really have a very significant impact on the research that happens right in our plant science department. And they, I never get invited to, very rare. And so that's part of the table. Also so I'm, maybe Laura, you want to share some thoughts there?
I would agree with you about the choices that you made there, the mainstream commodity groups. We have to be careful that the organic sector is very small and is very fragmented, and we have a hard time showing up at everything. So we have to be strategic. I know at the Organic Value Chain Roundtable, they always wanted representatives on this or that. And I'm not sure that we ever saw much payoff from showing up at those tables. But if you have the manpower and want to stay in it for the long haul, it's not a bad idea.
It's very easy to push back from the table as well when you run into a few challenges. And I have the picture of the farmers on the right in there for a reason, because they're very determined Quebec farmers who, you go to their farm, you would never think it was an organic farm based on the weeds, and they have a 1,500 acre farm. So you also have to be a bit persistent when you get to the table.
Okay, so we're just after 4 o'clock here, and I thought maybe in the last 2 minutes we could address 2 questions that have a similar theme here. We had one audience member that had to leave, but their questions were around vegan farming, but I think I'll just leave those because they had to leave. The last question here, I'm going to put 2 together, is about profitability. And they're coming from Charles Geddes and Branimir Getvaj, if I'm saying that correctly. So their questions are, in addition to discussion on differences in crop yield, it's important to stress the profitability advantage of organic production. Can you please comment on profit per acre in an organic versus conventional farming system? There's certainly more labor required, but can organic farmers get away with less land base?
I think Laura probably would be in the best position to answer this.
Yeah, that is a tough question. Profitability, in my view, a good chunk of that is yield. So you can either reduce your inputs or you can increase your output. And I think that organic producers need to do both. And what we're seeing here in Manitoba anyway is that the great farmers are getting better yields and they are becoming more profitable. and it's not that they want to focus on yields, but things have been pretty depressed in the last year in the grain sector in the prairie. And I think without focusing on the inputs and the output, you're going to have a harder time. So I hate to be one of those government people that pushes efficiency, but I think for too long we've kind of glossed over it in organic.
Okay.
I think to see example, there are very good examples, and you know, it's really great that in Manitoba we have the Manitoba Organic Alliance now, a producer organization which is arranging its own field days, and you know, once we can get on buses again and go look at operations, there's a lot of knowledge on organic farms which needs to be communicated to other organic farmers to improve profitability. But wouldn't you say, Laura, that is really one of the incentives for, you know, that has been a major incentive for people to choose organic? Or maybe Catherine has some thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, I think historically the transition to organic has definitely been motivated by the profitability. And like Laura said, you know, with the prices and the markets and all of grain production in the prairies being depressed, it has brought more focus on needing to be a good organic farmer. And I think that is a really good thing. I'll just give a couple examples from farmers that I've worked with who have recently transitioned, you know, have not only greatly enjoyed being organic, but have said that the last couple of years have been their most profitable per acre in their entire career of farming. So there are those examples out there, and that definitely stories like that are motivators, for sure.
Could I just add one quick thing too? As an inspector, I see like the whole diversity of the different growers across Manitoba and the prairies, and I've noticed that there are some very, very small grain farmers, and maybe from what I see is they maybe can't afford new equipment, and the premium itself really provides them with a lot more like revenue at the end of the year. That organic premium is pretty important.
Thanks,
Okay.
Will.
I hate to break up this. This is a really engaging audience, and I think those who need to leave are leaving. I'm going to unmute Jacob and Andrew. They have their hands raised if they have questions that they want to ask. So you're unmuted now if you want to unmute yourself. And in the meantime, we had a question, will we ever see organic checkoffs from mainstream farm organizations?
Go ahead, Laura.
Manitoba, the Manitoba Organic Alliance is actually working on a checkoff. So they had a producer vote last February, and the producers voted to charge themselves a levy, and that regulation has now gone to the Regulatory Accountability Committee of Cabinet, and they are considering whether to designate Manitoba Organic Alliance as the organic checkoff group in Manitoba. So if it happens, and I really do hope that it does, it would be the first government mandated organic checkoff in the country. And I think it might open some doors to the other provinces who thought that that was not possible in the past.
So one of the tables is provincial governments.
Okay, Andrew and Jacob, you're both unmuted. So
Okay, I guess thanks for the presentation. My question is, what would be the benefit of an organic system over a conventional system that uses conservation agriculture practices?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, conservation agriculture, if it's defined with plant diversity and minimum soil disturbance and constant ground cover, is a good system. The organic agriculture's big benefit is that it doesn't introduce pesticides and it doesn't introduce soluble nutrients. So it can provide a soil system which is more efficient, has a higher ability to hang on to carbon because of its greater microbial diversity. And that's one of the things about why I showed that mycorrhizal picture, is to get people thinking. There is actually a term called the soil's carbon energy efficiency, or the metabolic quotient, which can be really manipulated by enhancing the soil microbiome. But conservation agriculture systems are good. There's no market premium for them, which is unfortunate. That's what we tried to do with pesticide-free production 20 years ago. It didn't work. But I see organic as a choice. Environmentally, they both have attributes.
Awesome, thanks.
Okay. And just a comment here that Sask Organics has a voluntary checkoff, and that's been in place since 2019. And maybe I'll leave the last comment to Andrew Hammermeister if you're there.
Yes, I'm here, and it's so great to hear from you all and to see you all by video. So thanks for the great presentation. I just wanted, in terms of the big tables that we're at, the value chain roundtables that Laura mentioned were scrapped a year or two ago. There's a new series of tables, thematic tables, that Ag Canada and industry are establishing. And I'm fortunate to be sitting on one of them, the Sustainability Sector Engagement Table. And so I'm really keen to hear from the organic sector in terms of what the sustainability issues and concerns are that I can bring to this table. It's just kind of getting rolling, so we're still figuring out what that will be. But it is a place where there's a lot of like the big industry players, from Loblaws down to McCain's and through to conservation organizations as well. And so it's going to be a really interesting place. I'm excited to be there. So I'm looking always, if anyone's interested in providing comments or feedback relating to sustainability issues and our place, I'd love to hear that. But I'm also going to put a plug in for research in the future. And we're going to be starting to roll out our planning for the next organic science cluster program, hopefully soon. So Martin and others, what would be your top research priority going forward?
I think I've seen a farming systems approach. Like if I look at that farm in the bottom right there, the Quebec farm, the sort of the integrated approach that they use to deal with their soybean aphids, their field bindweed, and their nutrient challenges, took a systems approach. But Catherine probably has some ideas. Maybe Will as well.
Maybe we'll let Will go. He's just wrapping up his master's thesis. He's been thinking.
I think it'll I don't want to just repeat what Martin says, but it always comes down to just trying to find how to keep diversity into cropping systems and just making them profitable still as well.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
go ahead, Catherine.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say, I agree. But go ahead, Kristen. I know we're running over time.
Okay, no, I was just going to wrap up. So I don't know if there's any final thoughts there from the panel. Okay, so I want to thank Martin, Laura, Will, Catherine once again. This has been a great example of a seminar that has provided not only information, but it's been very thought-provoking, and we've achieved good engagement from other researchers, industry, farmers, and students all on the line. So thank you for providing that and for demonstrating what our seminar series is for. So with that, I'm going to close and thank everyone for attending and participating. For those who weren't able to attend or catch all of it, the recording will be available, and perhaps if there are resources that any of our panelists want to include, we can include the links there as well. So I wish everyone a safe growing season ahead. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.